If you've ever been shut out by your own family only to rise in silence, this story is for you. Subscribe to Revenge with DMA for real stories of dignity, quiet revenge, and healing from the people who should have stood beside you. Has your family ever underestimated you or pushed you away? Share your story below. We read them all. My name is Lucas. I'm 34 now, but this story started when I was 27, right after my father's funeral and 2 weeks before I found out I had been written out of everything he left behind. I sat across from my uncles and older cousins inside the conference room of the business my grandfather built, and my father expanded a logistics company with contracts that spanned 5 states and nearly 4 decades of relationships. It wasn't flashy, but it was strong, solid. Ours, except apparently not mine. We think it's best you step away, my Uncle Gary said. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like being cut loose after 10 years of building their supply chain software from scratch was somehow a kindness. I looked around the table. And no one met my eyes. Not Aunt Carla, who used to babysit me, not my cousin Joel, who still used my code to run inventory systems, not even my own brother, Nate, who sat with his hands folded, silent and complicit. Why? I asked. It wasn't anger, it was disbelief. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't naive. I just wanted someone to say it. Gary shrugged. You're a technical guy, Lucas. But this is about family legacy, leadership. You're more of a background person. You always have been. I remember the way that word landed, background, like I was furniture in the room I helped build. I nodded. Once. Slowly, I stood. No tantrum. No argument. No begging. Thanks for the clarity, I said, and then I walked out of the company I had helped modernize, where I'd eaten takeout and shipping pallets during late-night system installs, where I'd trained Joel, rewrote outdated architecture, even saved the company from a major data breach 3 years back without credit. They didn't just ban me, they erased me, or so they thought. I spent the next few days in silence, not the passive, defeated kind, the calculating kind, because here's the thing. In a family full of decision makers, I was the only one who understood how the business worked, not just the software, the contracts. You see, back when I was still useful, they tasked me with migrating our clients to a new platform. It was my job to centralize documentation, digitize vendor relationships, and build an automated contract renewal system. They never bothered to learn how it worked. They thought I was a tech guy, just a tool. But in doing so, they made one mistake. That would change everything. They gave me authority, invisible authority. I didn't own shares, but I owned access, and access, when handled with patience and strategy, is power. After they cut me out, I didn't touch anything, not right away. I took a job consulting for a logistics startup out of Austin. Small team, tight margins, but driven by people who saw value in the how, not just the who. It felt good to be needed again, even if the pay was modest, and the office was a shared co-working space that smelled faintly of instant ramen and Red Bull. But every time I logged into that startup system, I thought about the backend I built for my family's company, the one that automated every vendor contract renewal, the one that routed proposals through my framework, the one where I, Lucas, the background guy, had quietly become the central node of every digital handshake the company made. Because they didn't pay attention, they thought I was the computer guy. So when I said, let's use my firm's license to manage the contract automation system, it'll save costs, they nodded and signed, and just like that, I legally housed the beating heart of their vendor network on my infrastructure with my license under my terms of service. They never read the fine print, and that fine print had a clause. Renewals processed through this system require third-party confirmation for binding signatures. The third party was me. They didn't know, because when things work, People stopped asking how for almost 2 years. I let the system run without interference. I let them forget me. And then, one afternoon, I got a ping from a vendor I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "Hey, Lucas, just confirming you're still the point of contact on the contract for Eastern Freight Group. Got a renewal email, but wanted to make sure it's legit." I stared at the screen. Eastern Freight was one of our largest carriers. A 10-year partnership, and they didn't even know I wasn't in the company anymore. I smiled, not out of spite, but because the moment I'd been waiting for had just arrived. The moment when they would remember me, not as a threat, but as a foundation, and they'd realize they never built around me. They built on me over the next few weeks. I reached out quietly to a few long-standing vendors, not to manipulate, not to sabotage, just to clarify. I told them the truth, that I was no longer with the family business, that I had built the system they were using, that if they wanted to renew or renegotiate, they'd need to do so with full awareness of who held the keys to the framework. Some were surprised. Some were furious at my family. One executive, an old school guy I deeply respected, called me directly. "Lucas, is this why they've been ghosting my renewal emails?" I paused. "I can't speak for them, sir. I just want to make sure you're not caught in the middle of a misunderstanding." There was silence on the line. Then he said something that stuck with me. "They shouldn't have forgotten where the real loyalty came from." That phrase echoed in my head for days, because that was it, wasn't it? I wasn't angry they cut me out. I was angry they forgot that I was loyal long before they needed me to be, that I built systems not for control, but for stability, and they threw me out without realizing they were standing on the bridge I designed. Now they were stranded, and I was just getting started. When you hold the keys, you don't need to shout. You just wait for the knocking to start. And it did. The first call came from Joel, my cousin, the same one who sat silent in that boardroom when they told me I was a background guy. He didn't start with, "Hey," or "How are you?" He started with tension. "Hey, we're having some issues with the renewal system. Vendors are saying they can't get contracts through. That you've paused access." I paused, letting his voice hang in the air. "Lucas, I haven't paused anything," I said flatly. "I've just stopped confirming things I'm no longer being paid to maintain." He was quiet, uncomfortable. "But it's the system you built for us." "No, Joel. I built it for the company when I was still part of it. Then the company decided I wasn't. You can't fire the bridge builder and expect the bridge to hold." "I get it," he mumbled. "Look, we didn't mean to make it personal. You sat there and said nothing." He tried to laugh. "It was complicated, man. No, Joel. It was simple. You let them cut me loose, and now you're calling because you realized the guy they shoved out the door took the foundation with him." He sighed, frustrated. "What do you want?" There it was, the real question, the one they all wanted to ask but hoped they'd never need to. "What do I want?" I repeated. "I want nothing. You already gave me what I needed, freedom and lesson. But what you need is someone who understands your system. I'm asking if you'll help." I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window of the modest co-working office I now shared with 3 other independent consultants. A far cry from the family boardroom, but it felt mine. "I'll think about it," I said. Then I hung up, because power, when handled right, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be clear. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more vendors reached out, each one asking if I had received or approved contract renewals. The answer, in every case, was no. I wasn't sabotaging. I wasn't withholding. I was protecting myself. I couldn't legally process approvals for a company I wasn't affiliated with. The contract infrastructure had been registered through my LLC for technical compliance, but that LLC no longer had any business relationship with them. Their system was running on rails they didn't own, and they were only now realizing the train was heading off a cliff. They tried a workaround. I know because I got an automated alert. Someone attempted to overwrite permissions. To override the renewal system and insert new credentials.it failed twice. The third time, I received an email from their new IT manager. Hi, Lucas. We're trying to make a few updates to the contract portal. Please transfer admin access to our internal team at your earliest convenience. No greeting. No thank you. Just an assumption that I'd hand over my work like a spare house key. I replied with one sentence. That system is proprietary to my LLC and provided under previously agreed licensing terms, which expired when I was terminated. They didn't reply, but that same day, I received a formal email signed by my Uncle Gary, a cease and desist. They were accusing me of interfering with operations and holding essential systems hostage. I didn't panic because I had documentation, every line of code, every licensing agreement, every email showing their consent to use the system under my terms, even the termination. Notice they sent without revoking or transferring software rights. My lawyer responded with a 12-page rebuttal. It ended with a line that made me smile. If your client wishes to regain full control of their digital operations, they may license the infrastructure from my client at standard enterprise rates. Translation: you want the keys? Now you'll pay the locksmith. They didn't respond, not directly, but I heard from Joel again. He asked to meet. I agreed. Public place, neutral ground. A quiet coffee shop downtown where the air always smelled like burnt cinnamon and old books. He looked worse than I remembered. Tired. Anxious. He didn't order anything. Things are bad, he admitted. We've lost 2 contracts. Vendors are pulling back. They say we're unstable. I waited, and we are, he said, voice quieter. No one knows how to fix the system. We're scrambling. Gary's blaming everyone. Carla's freaking out about quarterly reviews. It's chaos. He paused, then said it. I think we made a mistake, Lucas. That sentence sat between us. Like a stone dropped into water. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. I just nodded. Once, yeah, I said. You did. He looked up. So, is there any way back from this? And there it was, what I had been waiting for, not because I needed to win, but because I wanted to hear the truth out loud from the same voice that once called me a background guy. I thought about it for a moment, then leaned forward. You can license the system, I said, at a fair rate. Not inflated, but market. Standard. And not from me personally. From my company. On a contract. Like everyone else. Joel blinked. No family discounts? He asked, half joking, half hopeful. I shook my head. Family ended the day you locked me out. This is business. Clean. Professional? Documented. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long time. He looked at me not like a cousin, but like a man whose value he could no longer ignore. He extended a hand. I took it. And no grudge. And a warmth. Just business. Later that night, I sat on the porch of my apartment, the city buzzing softly beneath me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. They had tried to erase me, but they built their future on my foundation. And when they buried me, they forgot I had already planted something, and now it had grown into something they couldn't tear down. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standard, and now they had to rise to meet. If contract was signed quietly. No announcement. No apology. Just a wire transfer, a formal agreement, and my company's logo at the bottom of their new infrastructure license. They paid the first year upfront. I forwarded the invoice to my lawyer with one line. Funny how fast the table turns when you've built it yourself. I didn't hear from my Uncle Gary after that. Not directly. But through the grapevine, I learned he'd stepped back for health reasons. Just 3 months later, my brother Nate had taken a more prominent role. Joel was tasked with managing vendor relations, which was a polite way of saying, "Don't mess this up again." They kept using my system, of course. Every transaction, every renewal, every update, all routed through the software they once said wasn't worth understanding, but now they couldn't ignore it. Because the background guy had quietly become the backbone, I didn't take on more work from them. I didn't need to. Instead, I poured my energy into expanding the software for other clients, people who actually appreciated clarity, structure, and quiet competence. By the end of the second year, I had 12 companies on retainer, not all big names, but honest, respectful. They paid on time. They listened when I spoke. They asked questions instead of making assumptions. And when they sent holiday cards, they addressed them to Lucas Bryant, founder, not the tech guy. That distinction mattered more than they knew. One afternoon, I stopped by my grandparents' house. They were both in their 80s now. Slower, softer, still sharp enough to know what was going on. We sat at the kitchen table, same one I used to sit at as a kid, while Grandpa carved apples and told me about the early days of the business. He hadn't said much after my dismissal, but that day, he cleared his throat, looked me in the eye, and said, "I heard they came back to you. They Did you say no?" "No, I said they'd have to pay." He nodded once. "Good." He leaned back, looked out the window, then said something I'll never forget. "I built the company with my hands. But you built the part that kept it alive. Don't ever let them make you feel like you're on the outside just because they were too lazy to learn the inside." It was the only validation I ever needed, not because I needed to be praised, but because I needed to know that somewhere along the line, someone saw what I built before they depended on it. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local university, part of a guest lecture series for students in business and systems engineering. The topic they gave me was building quiet infrastructure. I laughed when I read it, because they didn't know how close the title sat to the story of my life. I walked into that classroom with a simple goal, not to impress, but to pass something on. I told them about how power doesn't always look like the loudest voice in the room, how the people who hold systems together don't always hold the spotlight, and how control doesn't come from being feared, it comes from being trusted. One student asked if I regretted not speaking up more before. They pushed me out, and I said this: "Sometimes you don't realize you're holding the power until they try to take it and can't. That's when you know it was never about titles. It was about foundations, and you built them." They clapped, sure, but one student, quiet kid in the back, came up after. He said, "My family owns a business too, and I'm the tech guy they never listened to." I thought I was just the helper. Maybe I'm not. I shook his hand. "You're not," I said. "You're the one they'll call when the lights go out." That night, I walked home thinking not about the past, but the version of me that used to sit in boardrooms trying to be included. I don't sit in those rooms anymore. I own one. I don't ask for permission. I write the access. And when people ask me what happened with my family, I say, they built the business. I built the system. They had the name. I had the nerve. In the end, they paid for both. And I say it not with anger, but with peace. Because when you know what you built, you don't need their validation. You only need your vision. And I've got more of that than they ever imagined. The first Christmas after they licensed my system, I got an email from my brother Nate. Short. No subject line. No hope you're doing well. Just this: Grandpa's not doing great. Maybe you should come by. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't an apology either. It was familiar. The same tone they always used when they needed something from me, but didn't want to say it out loud. Still, I went. Not for them, for him. The old house hadn't changed. Same porch swing. Same mailbox leaning a little to the left. I let myself in. They had stopped locking the door years ago. Grandpa was in the den, wrapped in the same navy blanket I used to curl up under as a kid. He looked small, but his eyes were clear. Took you long enough, he rasped. I sat beside him. I didn't want to come back to a place I wasn't welcome. He gave a dry chuckle. They told me what happened. Took em longer than I hoped to realize who they pushed out. I looked over. Did they ever say why? He shrugged. Fear, mostly. You made em feel obsolete. When people don't understand how something works, they get scared. Especially when it's being built without them. I didn't say anything. Then he reached under the blanket, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to me. I opened it. Inside was a letter and a document handwritten, dated the year before he stepped away from the company. In the event of mismanagement or digital infrastructure failure, I grant Lucas Bryant authority to intervene, consult, and, if necessary, restructure core systems as an independent partner. I looked up. He was smiling. I never told them. Figured they'd learn when they needed to. You trusted me? I asked. Always did, he said. I just didn't shout it. Figured you were already strong enough without my approval taped to your wall. We sat in silence for a while. No grand reconciliation. No fireworks. Just peace. That was more than enough. He passed 3 months later, quietly. In his sleep, the funeral was small. Familiar faces, a few tears, a few stories about the early days loading trucks by hand, handwritten ledgers, long nights, and small wins after the service. Gary came up to me in the parking lot. Same forced smile. Same passive-aggressive posture he always had when he felt cornered. Your system's working well, he said. We, appreciate the help. I nodded. I was wondering if you'd ever consider coming back, he said. Not full-time, just advisory, maybe. You've earned a seat at the table. I looked him in the eyes. Calm, certain. There is no table anymore, I said. I built my own. He swallowed, trying to keep his pride intact. Then I added, the only reason you still have contracts is because I honor the work Grandpa started. Not because I owe you anything. He didn't respond, just nodded and walked away, and I let him, because this was never about revenge. It was about removal, of needing their approval, of trying to be part of a family that only saw worth in control, of mistaking silence for weakness when all along it was the quiet work that built their foundation. Now I run my own firm, not just back-end systems, but full-service logistics tech solutions. We help companies that want to modernize the right way, with respect, with training, with shared understanding. I mentor young developers who were once like me, overlooked, underestimated, told they were supporting roles instead of leaders. I tell them, you don't have to kick down the door. Just make sure the hinges are yours. And I mean every word, because I've seen what happens when people build on shaky ground, and I've seen what happens when someone like me builds quietly, but completely. The last time I drove by the old company headquarters, the lights were on, forklifts moving, vans idling out front, a business still running, but they never saw what held it up, what made the numbers stable, the clients stay, the contracts renew. They never saw the man they dismissed sitting at his own desk in his own office with his own signature at the bottom of their new beginning, and they never had to, because I knew, and that was enough, because legacy, it's not about being kept at the table. It's about building something no one can remove you from, and walking away the day they finally realize you never needed their name to carry your own.